Hello and welcome back once again to Second Opinion, where the game reviews are cool and your disembodied host is even cooler. No, really. It's really cold in here. Man, I wish I had something to warm myself up, like a magic spell or something. Wait, I do! I guess that means it's time. Time for
Harry Potter Month! Harry Potter Month! Harry Potter Month! Harry Potter Month!
So, I now welcome you to the first ever month of on Second Opinion. I thought long and hard about exactly what I wanted to lead off with when doing our initial month of, and I decided that I would pick a set of games that got adequate reviews when they were initially released, but seem to have been lost in the sands of time due to being licensed titles. I'm speaking, of course, of the EA-published Harry Potter games. During this month, there will be a new video each week, rather than every other week. As such, some of these might be a little shorter than a normal review. We'll be taking a look at the first game, second game, third game, and fifth game. Why skip the fourth game? Well, I don't exactly have the fourth game. Anyway, let's get started. The first game we're looking at is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the PS1. Philosopher's Stone if you're OG. The game was initially released on this platform on November 15th, 2001, by Argonaut Games. Surfing along the massive popularity of the first movie, the game was a sort of hybridization of the way the books and the movies were told. It follows the story of the movies closely, but is broken up by things like classes you have to attend, giving the game some room to breathe and expand, much like the books before it. As the story goes, Harry Potter figures out he's not a normal human being, but a wizard with fantastical powers. He jumps at the chance to leave his life as an outcast and goes to learn magic at an ancient wizarding school known as Hogwarts. But little does he know that he's extremely famous among the magical folk, as he's the only one to ever survive an attack from the dark wizard Voldemort. While the attack incapacitated said dark wizard, shadows loom over Harry as he begins to uncover a sinister plot that seeks to resurrect Voldemort. As the player, it's your job to take control of young Harry Potter and stop Voldemort from getting a hold on rebirth and immortality. Harry Potter on the PS1 is a third-person action platformer, with elements of stealth, puzzle-solving, exploration, and item collecting thrown in for a bit of variety. The game primarily takes place within a fully explorable Hogwarts, including some sections of the school grounds. Players will largely be tasked with moving back and forth between going to class and continuing the main plot through exploration. Mission structure is generally broken up into different areas of the castle, most of which can be revisited after you finish the initial goal in said area. The majority of the levels are largely linear, though they do occasionally give the player the chance for some form of deviation and freedom from the main path. The game gives the player the ability to collect several different things on the journey, each of which will give access to something different to enjoy. Performing tasks and classes will teach Harry new spells along the way. Famous witches and wizards cards include a bit of narrated context for the world the game takes place in. Collecting different colors of Bertie Bott's every flavored beans for Fred and George give Harry different bonuses that he can take advantage of. Meanwhile, whenever the player completes an objective, the game usually gives them a handful of house points that can help them win the House Cup at the end of the year. Though it's worth noting that I'm not entirely sure if it's even possible to lose the House Cup, since the original plot says that Gryffindor wins. Slytherin always seems just behind or just ahead of Gryffindor no matter how one plays the game. The graphical style presented is reminiscent of the art seen on the cover of the books, with a lot of bright, warm colors and an innocent, almost cartoony look. Sound design, meanwhile, includes quite a bit of voice acting and a few fully orchestrated music tracks. As previously stated, gameplay in the Sorcerer's Stone is broken up into visiting required classes and exploring the castle to further the plot. In class, the player is usually tasked with first performing a time-sensitive button combination minigame in order to learn a new spell. While the minigame is presented well, only children will likely find it very entertaining. The later versions for later spells can get somewhat challenging, but only because the required timing is incredibly tight. You have to complete the pattern 3 times in succession before you can move on to the next. At the very least, there's no real repercussion for failing, other than being required to try again. After you complete the minigame, you then perform a simple tutorial geared toward teaching you how to use the spell. Most spells consist of the player hitting a context-sensitive button, usually near certain objects. Then, depending on the spell, you will be presented with a small action you must perform during the spell. Wingardium Leviosa, it's Leviosa, not Leviosa, gives you control of the object you're magically lifting. The bottom line for most spells is that they allow Harry to explore in new ways. They don't usually do more than one or two things, although none of them really ever become obsolete either. Almost every spell is brought up regularly throughout the game, keeping things fresh and interesting. The exploration-oriented sections of the game focus on basic platforming, though most new areas have new mechanics. One area has Harry sneaking around Filch while making his way around the restricted section of the library using his invisibility cloak. Another tasks Harry with leading and feeding puffskeins on the school grounds, so that they'll grow large enough to plug up holes. It's pretty varied, and always keeps you interested in what would likely otherwise become rather mundane platforming. You see, there isn't much to the core of the gameplay. Harry automatically jumps when you push him toward a ledge. This works fine, however, because it rarely seems unfair. It almost always works as intended. The only other real mechanic is the use of the Flipendo knockback jinx, which is used mostly to attack enemies. While you can free aim it, the spell auto-locks to the most valid enemy in the moment. Again, this rarely performs in ways that frustrate the player. But that's about as far as the core mechanics go. Every other mechanic is primarily used to modify existing gameplay. It works well enough though, as long as you don't go expecting something life-changing. Honestly, I'd like to tell you about the things this game does poorly, but there isn't too much to talk about. Loading times can be a little long, I suppose, and there are a few parts that are surprisingly difficult for a game that's aimed at being all ages. One of these parts tasks you with navigating the tunnels down to a vault in Gringotts Bank, using a rotating minecart of sorts. You can move the cart either left or right in a full 360, and you can lock it in any position. You need to avoid various obstacles as you make your way through, which is easier said than done. The cart goes fast at times, and although it gives you warning for when and where the obstacles are going to appear, you're at the mercy of momentum. If you're going around a particularly fast left turn, for example, the natural forces on the cart will start pushing it toward the right. If an obstacle is on the right, it can be difficult to avoid in time. The only other obstacle that gave me any sort of trouble was the chess minigame at the very end. This minigame has Harry playing as a chess piece on a big board. His goal is to get into positions that allow him to defeat the opposing chess pieces without himself getting knocked out. The final two sections of said minigame can be fairly challenging, because, unless I'm mistaken, there's only one way to solve them. When I was younger, this is where I repeatedly got stuck, and I could only ever beat the game using a Game Shark. This time, I was able to figure it out eventually, but both puzzles still took me a good 15 minutes or so each. Other than those difficulty spikes, I wouldn't say there are really any glaring issues with the game. Hit detection is about as accurate as you'd expect, lock-on rarely hampers the player, and the game runs pretty darn smoothly. Graphically, the game is really great for a PS1 title. The faces on a lot of the models seem to be modeled after the actors in the movies, if not scanned in directly. This doesn't match with the rest of the aesthetic, which is much more bright and exaggerated. But aside from the faces, the graphics are generally what I would call pleasing to the eyes, and they're varied despite mostly taking place in a single castle. There's a fair bit of graphical tearing and warping, which isn't too surprising. Most games on the PS1 were plagued with these problems. Such were the times, I suppose. As far as sound is concerned, things are perfectly adequate. Sound effects are average, many of them being stock effects you've possibly heard elsewhere. Music is strong and whimsical, with an orchestral feel similar to its film counterpart. The designers really understood where and when to place music as well, with much of your exploration having no music at all. Instead, you are graced by atmospheric natural sounds that can sometimes do a great job of foreshadowing things to come, while still giving life to your otherwise simple exploration. Voice acting is about what one would expect. It's not exactly great, but I wouldn't call it bad. The cheesy nature is likely enough for kids to find engaging, and will give adults a good laugh. It's not Symphony of the Night levels of bad, but it's no The Last of Us either. In the end, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone isn't bad at all for being a licensed game. It accomplishes everything it sets out to accomplish, without too many real hitches. It is caught up sometimes by the antiquity of the PS1, but the problems caused by the hardware are usually trivial at best. If you're a Harry Potter fan, or simply a parent who wants to give their child something safe and well made to play, you can't really go wrong here. Stay tuned, because next week we'll be stepping it up and taking a look at Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for the GameCube. Have a great week!